Welcome viewers to this series of lectures on the stages of early Indian economy from historical perspective. Of course, we are tracking the entire stretch of what take up some of the leftover discussion related to the urban experiment, or more popularly as we understand it as Harappan civilization, and then quickly come to, in the next part of today's lecture, we will come to the third phase, that is pastoral phase, or more popularly understood as the Rigvedic period or early Vedic period. So, if you, as you can see it on your slide, that the entire stretch of early India is divided into several stages depending on the quantity and quality of change in economy overall that historians get to see happening, unfolding over a period of time, and therefore some periods are bracketed as one period from economic point of view. Please understand this, that in this demarcation the political labeling, which usually is the practice amongst the historians, particularly traditional mold of history writing, gives a lot of importance to political labeling. Most of the changes are labeled in political, they are couched in political vocabulary in terms of dynasties, in terms of military change, military skirmishes or battles and so forth. But this classification is on the basis of what was happening in economy and say in the process of production, in the profiling of economy, whether it was outwardly oriented or whether it was cosmopolitan, having cosmopolitan outlook, or trade and commerce is registering very many activities and so forth. So whatever is the distinguishing feature of a particular period from economic point of view, that is culled out and used as labeled to typify a particular period in early Indian history. So first, as you can see on your slide, prehistoric subsistence, this we have discussed in the earlier interaction, and we haven't quite devoted more time to this because this is covered usually in several other discussions related to, say, Paleolithic period, Mesolithic period, Neolithic period and so forth, because here production, all through this period, production or whatever mankind is doing is done primarily for self-consumption and not for exchange purpose, institutionalized exchange purpose. There are sporadic evidences of exchange happening, but they are all couched in cultural vocabulary of the period. So there could be some rites, rituals, or some practices, cultural practices of exchange. That's why they are happening. There is nothing like long distance trade and commerce happening in the prehistoric past, and in fact, since it is not happening, that is why we call it prehistory as such. And then the next phase is the urban experiment. And you can see the timeline 2600 to 1500 BCE very broadly, because this in Indian subcontinent, this is registered as the coming up of the first Bronze Age civilization in Indian history, in the form of what we understand as Harappan civilization or Indus Valley civilization, right? There are several claims by historians today that they also want to change the labeling of the civilization from Indus Valley civilization or Harappan civilization to, say, Saraswati civilization and so forth, because of that understanding of this river, which perhaps was lost over a period of time, Saraswati. Some identify this with Ghaggar Hakra channels that are still there. You can see as very small streams surviving today. On account of the density of Harappan and post-Harappan or later Harappan settlements around a particular river. So, moving beyond this, what very interestingly we get to see is the relapse, you can say, to pastoral phase, because generally, and in fact that's a wrong word to be used, relapse, because it happens. I mean, there is no fixed linearity of progression from urban centers to something more refined and so forth. In history, we do get to see several phases where the earlier period appears to be rather, you can say, rather developed or rather urbanized, and the subsequent period is of a different flavor. So, the Rigvedic period that we generally understand with reference to the time bracket of 1500 to 1000 BCE in the Sapta Sindhu area, that does not quite give us the cosmopolitanized, urbanized kind of civilizational life that the Harappans were living almost over the same area. And but there is a gap of around 200 to 300 years before the you can say decline of the Harappan civilization and emergence of what we understand as the Rigvedic culture. Now, again, in the recent past, you will find, and even earlier, there had been claims by historians who tend to see the urban phase of Harappan life not as discontinuous to what we get to see as the Vedic culture or the early Vedic culture. So, they don't quite agree to the fact that the two, or you can say the builders of the two cultures or civilizations were different stock of people. So, there is a belief in some set of historians that it is the continuity of the urbanized life under the Harappas that should be seen with reference to what we get to experience or what we get to visualize through Rigvedic references. But there are some very glaring gaps in this conceptualization, and this is how it is debated amongst historians. We will see as to what those points are. And then subsequently you have plough cultivation and agricultural economy happening say in the later Vedic period, broadly 1000 to 600 BCE. This is again happening in the upper Gangetic plain, and by the end of this period, that is around 600 BCE, we find a fair degree of expansion of population, or the population which is associated with Vedic culture now gets to increasingly live in an area that we today understand as the Middle Gangetic Plain, which extends from, say, present-day Prayag to Allahabad, to Bhagalpur in Bihar. And this stretch of land becomes the center point of quite a few changes that we usually associate with 600 BC, including that of transformative role played by iron technology, transplantation of paddy, and so forth. There are historians who negate this, who don't agree with the criticality of iron-based production or paddy transplantation and so forth in transforming the life and times of the people living in this period. So that debate also goes in history writing. And we have seen that unfolding over a long period of time now. Thereafter, we get to see the pinnacle, you can say, of the monarchical control in the form of the Mauryan Empire, lateral spread of state society also. And there is something like pan-India kind of governance, or the subcontinental dimension of the territory is brought under one political arrangement under the Mauryas. Again, historians argue to the contrary, in the sense that there are historians who don't quite agree with the imagery of the Mauryans as extremely centralized and bureaucratized. And subsequent to that, say from 200 BCE to around Common Era 300, is understood. This time period is understood little differently, because now the economy is registering some kind of a change where the large state-controlled farms are no more to be there. It seems to be smaller in size. Money economy has been doing extremely well around this period of time. We have a variety of coin types, coin typologies coming into being now in circulation in India. Indo-Greek coins and the circular coins, the coins bearing legends, introduction of gold coins, carrying the image of the king and something inscribed as a legend, even dates being inscribed. So quite a few things that we even today associate with the type of coins that we use in the contemporary period actually gained roots around this time, and therefore in that sense it is very formative. And the overseas trade with reference to Europe, with reference to the Roman world, is at its peak in this period. And so it is a kind of time. The post-modern times is a time bracket where money economy is doing very well, where Roman trade, overseas trade is doing very well. The polity or polities are smaller. They are not as big as the Mauryans, which preceded this period. And thereafter, we have the beginning of or you can say from Gupta period onwards, some feudal tendencies start getting noticed, and over a period of time, say in the later Gupta period and post-Gupta period, there are some more glaring changes in the economy, society, polity, and so forth. Again, we have a set of historians who don't agree to this presentation, to this narrative of feudalization, and they rather tend to view it in a different way, not in a negative way, that a bigger polity is disintegrating into smaller polities, leading to feudal tendencies and so forth. So they rather emphasize the capacity building of the regions, different regions in Indian subcontinent, capacity building in terms of sustaining sustaining an edifice of state, sustaining the architecture of a state. So it is coming of age of these reasons for these regions. So that is the broad picture of the categorization or classification that historians have done for early India with reference to stages of economic change. Now, since we have already discussed the first two, that is the prehistoric subsistence past and the urban experiment, that is Harappa, and I think while doing so we had left some portions because of paucity of time, and that I will try to reiterate or re-emphasize to give a complete picture of what should be understood with reference to the stage of economy during the Harappan period, or say 2500 BC to around 1500 BC. Now, archaeologically, or when we talk of these things, obviously the area that we are talking of is the area around the Indus River or Sindhu Nadi, and there are archaeological evidence of several towns. Now, why do we call it towns? Is it written that they are towns? No, we don't know, because whatever are inscribed on say potteries or elsewhere on clay tablets as Harappan script have not been satisfactorily deciphered. So we don't know what is written on it. But what we do know certainly is that the range of excavations that have been carried out give us a variety of settlement types. So all these settlements are not of the same kind, and so there are some sites that appear to be very rich in terms of burnt brick buildings, closely clustered settlements, very organized roads and drainage system. In some of the cities there are even fortified areas. Then within that fortified settlement, in some cases we have citadel area, the area which is built on a raised kind of a platform, and the downtown area. There is a distinct change in the size of rooms and houses that are in the citadel area and the downtown area. They are all indicative of some kind of hierarchy, some kind of differentiation in economic and social terms. And that's very natural for any civilization, because it is through the accumulation of surplus through whatever means. We don't quite know, particularly in the case of Harappa, whether it was through some revenue or tax system, how it was organized, what was the rate of it. All these things we don't know, and perhaps we cannot know unless we have literary sources to this effect, and we are able to decipher them. So there are quite a few things that we can know only through archaeological evidence, and that is a given in the case of Harappa. So whenever we come across thickly populated and congested nuclei of houses made of fired bricks, clean, possibly municipal upkeep of roads. Why I say possibly municipal? Because generally it is believed that in community life, particularly of the dimensions that are there in the case of Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, or cities of that dimension, individual households cannot look after the road upkeep or drainage system and so forth. So it presupposes the way they are neatly done, the way it is done in a very organized fashion. So it presupposes the existence of some municipal authority that could be doing it. So roads are there, drains are there, fortified settlements usually divided into citadel and downtown area. So whatever we get to see as archaeological remains of these settlements actually go on to constitute our imagery of a city in archaeological terms. And Indian imagery of city first comes through archaeology, and it is only subsequently in the later Vedic or you can say post 6th century BC treatises or in novels, in literary creations, we get to see how a city is visualized in aesthetic terms, in social terms. But so far as brute material reality is concerned, first interface in terms of time, I am saying from earliest to the present times, first interface of a city is through archaeology, through the Harappan cities. So whatever we get to see there as houses, fired brick houses, roads, organized drainage system and so forth, that goes on to constitute our imagery of a city. And we tend to regard them as city, that it must be a city, and other sites are not so clustered kind of settlement, not so congested kind of settlement in terms of houses and so forth. So the range of activities are also limited. The municipal upkeep, so to say, is not that good. So we tend to regard them as either a factory site which is catering to the requirement of a city or for its surroundings, or it is some kind of a suburb, agrarian suburb, as you can see on your slide. So much not known is about their implements of agricultural production, but plough cultivation in pre-Harappan phase is noticed in Kalibangan, and earlier we have spoken about it as well. We don't quite know what was the material of the plough, whether it was wood, because what we have is terracotta replica of plough and actual plough, whether they was made of wood or some other metal, because copper was known to them, bronze was known to them. So it seems that it could be made of wood, and subsequently Vedic texts do speak of wooden ploughs. Indus Plain annually is inundated by floods, and there could be some regional difference, because Kalibangan area might have had a long history of plough cultivation, and that's why in the pre-Harappan layer we have the evidence of ploughed field coming from Kalibangan. Stone axes are there, we have spoken about it, socketed axe, and cemetery age period. We have Ravi people, evidence of Ravi people. This is the conventional way in which we tend to call a particular period or its inhabitants. So since they are close to Ravi river, so they are also designated as Ravi people. And this Aryan debate that since it is after Harappa, after the decline of Harappa, so maybe that they are the ones who we refer to as Aryans. Some argue that they came from outside, from Central Asia. Some assert that they are local inhabitants. They are the same people that we mistakenly understand as coming from outside. Then we have evidence of rice, wheat, barley, sesame, peas. They are all grown here. Not much is known about their trade with other areas, or they are agricultural objects, so it must be a bulk item trade. But trade in cotton, precious stones like lapis lazuli, amazonite and jade seems to be very likely. Sumerian references are there, which is a contemporary Bronze Age civilization, to quite a few objects derived from Harappa, from Indus Valley. So there is very strong possibility of overseas transactions which must be happening along the coastal lines, given the fragile nature of the sailing technology that must have been there. And then we have some items that are referred to as exchange items between the two civilizations, and similarly seals in Harappa are also indicative of private property. It could be part of stamping packages, and therefore that is what largely sums up what we understand as the mature phase of Harappan civilization. And in the next part of it, we shall talk about the subsequent phase, that is the pastoral phase. Thank you.